Hi everybody, welcome to the Understanding the Performance Assessment project. This video will help you understand the next major assignment in the course. It's due, the final project is worth 15% of your grade. Part of it is due, your draft rubric and a couple of other things are due November 25th, and they'll be given as homework for one of our next modules. And then the final project is due December 2nd. This project can be turned in up to a week late with a 10% point penalty, and it may be revised. To locate this assignment, as always, go to the Major Assignments folder in the course. Once you've opened the Major Assignments folder, you'll see the folder for the Performance Assessment project. Once you've opened the Performance Assessment project, you'll see all the materials you need to do the project. Let's take a look at the instructions for the assignment, which are in that folder. The first thing you're going to do is think about, well, let's start with the purpose of this project. The purpose of the project is to design a performance task and then come up with a rubric that would assess it. Let's remember that a performance task is different than just a knowledge task. A knowledge task requires students to understand and memorize knowledge. A performance task requires students to do something. So your performance task should be something that they write or perform, or a skit, do a poster, do a PowerPoint, something that you can't just grade with a quiz. The first thing you're going to do is come up with a grade level and a standard. And as always, once you look in the standards folder on the course, you should be able to narrow in on a grade level and write it there. Let's say you do a 7th grade and the standard is, you're going to copy the whole standard, not just the number. Then you're going to think about a learning target that's aligned with that standard. Remember, don't just rewrite the standard, because a standard is very broad and could take weeks or even all year to accomplish. A learning target is meant to be accomplished in 1 or 2 or 3 lessons. Also remember that a learning target is different from an objective. You will start it with students will be able to, and then you add a target on. So let's say students will be able to count to 10 with 80% accuracy. The with 80% accuracy turns it from an objective into a learning target. The context is, where's it going to be taught? How many students? Are there any gifted students or students with IEPs? Answer the questions there to answer the context section. Then you're going to, in a couple of paragraphs, decide what lessons that you've taught. Maybe in the students be able to count to 1 to 10, you had them count with manipulatives, or you had them count holding up numbers. But whatever it is you're teaching the learning target, describe a lesson or two that you've taught them that covers that learning target. Finally, think of a performance task that you could have them do to show you that they have mastered the learning target. So remember, a performance task is something they do. So maybe it's as simple as having each child come up to you and count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That would be something that they could do. If you're teaching other lessons, you might have them write something, and you might have them write an essay, for example, or you might have them develop a PowerPoint. You might have them do a complicated math problem showing their work, and it wouldn't just be something that it would have to be multiple steps that you would want graded. It couldn't just be coming up with an answer. So something they do that's complicated, that requires multiple steps. Then you're going to design a rubric that aligns with that performance task. So I've put lots of resources, and we were spending several weeks on this. So between the textbook, the lectures, and the materials that I put in the performance task folder, you should be able to design a solid rubric. So first you're going to think about, well, what kind of rubric would I design? Do I want a holistic rubric, or do I want an analytic rubric? And there are justifications for each of those that your textbook goes into. Make sure you have a good number of criteria on the rows. So you don't want just one row. That's not really a rubric. You want at least 3 or 4 rows on your rubric, and probably 3 or 4, probably closer to 4 columns. Those are the levels of performance. Make sure everything's aligned with your objectives and standards. So for example, in my example of counting to 10, you wouldn't want a criterion that says counts to 11 or above. Make sure it's all aligned. Make sure there's a continuum of performance. So what do I mean by that? So make sure your levels are clearly defined. So maybe for the 1 to 10, you might say something like student can count using 0 to 5 of those numbers. Our student, the next level might be 6 to 8 of those numbers, or 9 to 10 of those numbers. So make sure there's a continuum going across the different columns. Make sure it's well aligned with the task. And you may use the internet to help you, or AI, but be aware that if you do so, you might not get a good one, and you might not get a rubric with all the items we talked about in class. So there's a tip sheet and the most common error sheet in the folder and for the project. Make sure if you use AI that you're checking it against all of those requirements for the project. Write a justification about why you chose holistic or analytic. You must select one or more arguments using the textbook and cite the textbook to receive full credit here. Write a reflection about this experience. What went well? What did not go well? What surprised you? What did you learn? Let's take a look at the grading rubric for this project. There are 3 levels to the grading rubric: 0 points for missing or needs improvement, 1 point for fair, and 2 points for excellent. The criteria going down the left side are grade level. I'll be looking to see that you presented a grade level that it aligns with your standard. Standard, write out the entire standard. Learning target, I'll be looking to see that you have a well-aligned learning target that's a true learning target with a target for success, for example, with 80% accuracy. I'm going to be looking at your context to see if it makes sense, your lessons to see if they would teach the learning target, and the performance task, well, your description of the performance task to make sure that it all aligns. So you have a learning target, you have lessons that teach the learning target, and you have them doing something at the end that's a culminating type of project, and that it's a true performance task, that it's not just something that you would do in a quiz, for example. Your rubric has a few rows on the grading rubric. I'm going to be looking to see that your criteria and levels of performance are very clear, very appropriate to the task and grade level. I'm going to be looking to see that it's aligned to your performance task. And I'm going to be looking at your justification to see if you backed it up with evidence from the textbook as to the type of rubric you use. Remember, an analytic rubric uses rows, and for each individual concept or criterion, and a holistic rubric kind of puts them all together. At your reflection, I'm going to be looking to see that you answer the questions I presented. Was it deep and thoughtful, or did you just kind of present a conclusion? Your spelling, grammar, and professionalism count, as does your rubric presentation, which I forgot to mention, your rubric must be in a table. So if you don't know how to do that, there are plenty of resources out there. In Word, it's simply insert table, and you pick out the number of columns and rows you want, but you can certainly find resources all over the internet to help you with a table. So that's it for the grading.